Okay, Lexington, it's time to talk. I'm Stephanie Feekson, Program Coordinator for Lexington's Domestic and Sexual Violence Prevention Coalition.
And I'm Diane Fleet, Assistant Director of Greenhouse 17 and Chair of the Prevention Coalition. Welcome to It's Time to Talk. We'll be talking to many community members to help us gain understanding and model conversations and actions to help us move forward so that you can say, it's time and I am ready to help.
So, Diane, it's that time of year when families are getting together more for picnics and family reunions. And soon it's going to be time to start planning the holidays, which is a lot of fun, except when you have that family member that you know is causing harm to someone else. I mean, what do you do with that person during those situations?
I'm so glad we're having this conversation. I think it comes up quite a bit. You know, people are getting ready to celebrate Thanksgiving or 4th of July is coming up. And there is, as you just said, that individual. And do we intervene? Do we not intervene? How do we recognize it? And sometimes our experience with that person is really positive, right? It's an individual that we care for. It's somebody that we like. They bring presence and they're joyful. But we know on the side that there is not a good home life and there's abuse going on. And how do we sort of intervene safely and become more comfortable with that conversation? We have Darlene Thomas here, who's the Executive Director of Greenhouse 17. And we also have LaTanya Jones, who is here, who is a poet, author, and activist. And I think that they might be able to help us shed some light on this.
Well, I sure hope so. So, Darlene and LaTanya, what do you think? What do you do when a family member is presenting to you as someone who's loving and caring, but you know behind closed doors they're not exhibiting that same behavior with their own family?
I think that is a multi-layered question, because when we are talking about this kind of violence, we are talking about families. And so many of the families can be rooted in generations of this kind of violence. And so I like what Diane said at the beginning about being able to really talk with the person who is experiencing the direct violence. But we know in many of the families, there's not just one person. But if you have an idea about who may be the target of the violence, it might just be about comforting them, letting them know that you see them and that you have seen the other sides of the person who is causing harm. And I'm at a point in my activism and in my life where I'm trying to show love in as many different capacities as I possibly can. And so that means being willing to have hard conversations with people that we would term as difficult, dangerous even. Part of my work is to sit with people who've been charged with really horrible crimes. And I'm still able to find a place of love to enter, to be able to have the conversation. And so just as I would speak with someone who's the target of the violence, and I'm just using that term loosely, but the one that we know is experiencing the greatest amount of harm, perhaps in the family at that time, extending that same kind of love to a person who might be causing the harm.
I think that's a really important point, this whole idea of leading with love and seeing really accountability as an act of love, not pretending that you don't see what's really going on. But Darlene, what do you know?
It's complex, right? Situations are not easy. And I think the first approach for most of us is to make sure that you go to the person who's been targeted or the individual's being targeted, because we need permission to really address it beyond that, because the safety of that individual may very much depend on the secret or what's perceived as the family secret at that time. Whether you want to buy into it or not, for the safety of that individual, you might have to bide some time and then really work with the person who's been targeted to talk about what would it look like to be safe and to be able to tell your story. And are you that safe person, and that you see that these, what you're seeing, how it's presented might not be exactly what's happening in the home. You know, there's subtle things that you've picked up with and on because you care about that person. So it's complex, and people are not all bad. And the very reason that survivors have cared for the person that's hurt them is because they come with good parts and pieces that we want to be able to love and care for, or we find charismatic and those things, which is why we grapple with this. It is complex. It is difficult for all of us to navigate. But with the permission, I believe it's really important to be able to confront with expectations and boundaries. And sometimes it might be, I can love you, but I know this is going on. This person's been arrested, or there's protective orders. Things have happened. And you have to say, you may have to have your own boundary to go, not in my home, right? Like, this is not invited here, but I still support you. I'm not here to tell you who to be. We're here to tell you what we'd like for you not to do or engage in. And there's other choices and options. So I think you get caught between what you personally, looking in your own mirror, that you have to reflect on and figure out, at the same time that, most importantly, you're supporting the people who've been targeted. And then also not necessarily approaching the person who does harm with hurt or hatred. It really needs to be a place of love. Everybody has a story. Everybody has a story, including those that do harm. That made it acceptable.
Right. And I'll shift right to you. But both of you said this, and I think it's interesting. You both said it's a complex issue. And I think sometimes when we're talking with families, we reduce it to a very simplistic issue, right? This is the correct person, and this is the wrong person. This is the right behavior, and then this is the bad behavior. And I think sometimes when we approach this, whether it's with a victim survivor or whether it's the one causing harm, we often, particularly family members who have interest in the outcome of what happens in this, we sometimes approach it with a solution already in mind. You need to leave this person. You need to do this. And I wonder if you have thoughts a little bit as we begin to talk about the complexity, but how do we ourselves, if we're the one who's wanting to maybe intervene or have these conversations, how do we do this respectfully, knowing that we are not the expert on other people's lives, that we need to sometimes hand that over to someone and just be an ear, be a support system, but not take over. And I think we have a tendency many times to want to take over and make it better and fix it.
Well, don't we hear that a lot, though, right? Where we have family members that will call Greenhouse 17 going, I want my daughter out of there. I'm just going to drive to Georgia and pick her up, make her come home. And you're like, that may not be the answer. What does your daughter want? Like, what is that person's experience? And I do think our instinct is we're kind of invested in the outcome. The only way out of this is to leave or to end that relationship. And that may or may not be the case. And it may not be the safest way to do things either. So, I agree totally that you have to be patient and
I think when
kind and open.
I think when I'm in that mindset, that it's really not even about the person who's being harmed, it's about my comfort. And so I have to get honest about that what I think is the best, I have no idea what's the best. And so if I can get honest with that, then I can have an honest conversation. And I mentioned before about leading with love, even when I know that there's a person in the room who might be causing harm. I'm a person who can cause harm. And so that allows me to be able to have some empathy and some compassion. And so I don't have to ignore the fact that that person who is causing harm is likely in some pain. And so it might just be simply, I see you, I've heard about some of the things going on. We mentioned that if there's a protective order and everybody in the family knows, there's not supposed to be any violence at this particular, I can come to that person with some empathy. I'm taking off the advocate hat, and I'm a person who's at the picnic. I'm a person who is with my family, and also probably have some understanding about how this family operates and the secrets we do keep. And so just being able to open up and see, they know that they've been deemed the villain. They know that they already have, if there's a protective order, they know that they have been, that law enforcement has had to come into play. There's been a judge. So they are already carrying these things. We might think that they're not feeling it because we consider them as narcissists and they can't feel a thing. The fact that they're acting out in such a violent way means they feel things at a very, very deep level. They just don't know what to do with it. And it turns into violence.
I think that attitude really is leading with love because I struggle with that. This person is causing harm. And when we say causing harm, we don't just mean being disrespectful or mean, but they are being violent or controlling and really preventing this other person that we love from being their full selves. So approaching the person that is causing that harm and being, open to the pain that they are experiencing when they're causing so much pain to someone else is really a difficult concept for me.
I think that's why I'm moving into a space of talking about this as a response to trauma, and trauma is entering into our language on a daily basis. I can be at the grocery store. Well, I really can be at the grocery store and someone will tell me, they're going through some things. This is how I'm built. But in that capacity, if I understand, if I truly, it's not a buzzword, we know that trauma has some effects. We know that there's generational trauma. When a generation of people has been wronged, when an individual has been wronged, typically it is cycling down from some other wrong. And so I have to remember that. That's why I can say, I have seen you, I've heard, I see my friend who's my sister and my cousin who's suffering. I know that you didn't wake up and just decide to do this. And if you ever want to talk about it, let's talk. I can identify pain, and I know that when we're in it, we will blow it out. As one of my mentors says, Resma Minicum, we will blow out our trauma and our pain on the person who is closest to us. And when we demonize people, there's no room for growth. There's no room to grow into some sort of accountability, and I'm not, I'm still trying to figure out how I even feel about our, criminal justice system, knowing that it is not built to actually help a person go in, deal with their trauma, and come out so they don't continue to do it.
No, I think that is really the crux of this conversation, right? Because it can't be left up to the criminal justice system. It does require families and friends and communities to get involved.
One of the things too, LaTanya, that you said, and to step it back even a little bit maybe, is that sometimes there's generational pieces that sort of make things ripe in family for oppression, patriarchal, turning a blind eye, whatever that might be. And so even though there certainly are those cases where we know that there is actual, by legal definition, domestic violence going on in a home, but sometimes we just worry that there is an oppressive, abusive, not well experiences going on because there is a lot of condescending. There is a lot of, I manage the money and you do not. There's a lot of demeaning behavior. And so in a culture of a family, are there some things that you all would recommend, or that you would, how do you begin, if you're a person who wants to be part of this It's Time campaign, and it starts with my own family, my own home, how do we begin to have those conversations of, I want something different for us. I want something different around the Thanksgiving table. I want us to begin to celebrate and uplift our community, which in this case would be family, versus that's just how we do things. That's just how things are, And I think we can see that in lots of different environments, but I don't know.
Yeah, we're all sitting here as members of families, I'm assuming, and there's an awakening that has to happen for me as an individual before I can actually be helpful. And so I've got to have these questions about why does it always feel like this when we get together? What have I actually seen in my own childhood? What are the messages? I've got to do some personal inquiry. And then, maybe that after those questions arise, maybe I seek out some answers. So I might call, Greenhouse 17 and actually say, what is power? What does that look like? What is this? What are these words I'm hearing them toss around in this campaign?
And one of the words you said earlier, and we talked about previously, is that idea of accountability. So what is it even that we're doing? What does accountability look like within families? How do we help someone stop causing the harm? What does that even look like?
I think it's, again, multi-leveled, right? So accountability can be just acknowledging and seeing, of what you've seen or what you believe to be true, or questioning or talking to a survivor. Accountability can be knowing your own truth in that whole piece, right? And the role that you've played, and acknowledging that accountability, should be driven a lot of times by the survivor or the people that are experiencing it as well, on what do they need for accountability, to that individual, and what kind of support do they need from the family, whether they're staying or leaving, just a safe space to be. Accountability might be providing that safe space to have a dialogue and a conversation without having to take actions, or feeling like you're compelled to take actions that neither of those parties are ready for or wanting to have. Accountability can be just breaking the silence, breaking the secrets,
And that's what I was thinking when what you first said. When I asked about accountability, I meant, what does it look like for that person that is causing harm? But like you said, being introspective and looking at how we are accountable to that behavior, and how have we even unknowingly colluded with that behavior by ignoring it in the past. You're right. It's not just the person causing harm. It's all of us need to think about accountability for ourselves.
When I think of my own family, sometimes you're navigating some really difficult waters, right? Because you can acknowledge and want to hold accountable and be willing to take whatever steps that individual, or you would be willing to take whatever steps, but the individual would be at greater risk if you did so, or if you confronted, or maybe accountability is just providing the safe space, allowing for the process to take place. And also, accountability is not necessarily, I agree totally with LaTanya, of demonizing the other party. These are individuals. If I look at my own family, that the survivor loved, had children with, tried to raise a family with, they are more to them than they're, like what we want to label simply as an abuser or a perpetrator, or to give them language. They are human beings. So accountability in that way would not to step into spaces or using language or things that's not comfortable or pertinent to that situation, based out of your own need, which is doing your own work. You got to be comfortable with you before you can really help hold accountable.
Accountability is an internal process, whether we're talking about our somas, our physical bodies, or if we're talking about a collection of people that we're working with, a collaboration of people that we're working with, a government, a nation. Like, these are all bodies, and we've got to be asking questions about how are we colluding with this violence. If we, and I don't believe I can make anyone else accountable. I know it because people try to make me accountable for stuff, and I'm like, no, I'm not looking at that. So, and I'm not talking about like abusing other people, but I don't want to be. I do have a mentor who said to me, she said, LaTanya, what does it feel like when you are sleeping and someone comes in and they're like, you gotta get up, you gotta get up, you gotta get up. How do you? And I'm like, I pop up like, what?
I get angry.
I get angry.
I get so annoyed.
What does it feel like when someone comes to you, or when you're allowed to just wake up on your own? It is gentle. I have a beautiful day. I have a beautiful outlook. And so it's not my job to go shaking people into accountability to wake up to all their wrongs. I can create an environment where people can feel like they are safe to wake up and tell like the deep truths of their own trauma, and come to an understanding like, that's why I do that. I'm trying to heal something through somebody else. I'm trying to overpower someone else because so much power was stripped from me, and when we can get to that, then we get people to a level where they could maybe determine that it's time for me to be accountable for what I've done.
Or people think they should have that power over others. So it's not always trauma. It's these cultural narratives that we hear, right? That as a certain identity, you should have power over someone else.
So, and that goes back to that. Are we willing in a public campaign, are we willing to look at the ways that we collude with this kind of violence? That's willing to dissect it.
That's such a great point, honestly, because when I think about when you say accountability being the individual, right, which is true, survivors spend a lot of time trying to get their partners to a place of self-accountability. They spend a lot of energy trying to fix things, make it better, appease it, not push buttons, whatever that looks like in their own narrative of their own relationship. And the reality is survivors can't get individuals there. Like what it takes to get a certain individual to decide to look inwards at themselves and what choices they're making and how that does harm to other and change that is an internal process that survivors aren't able to fix. A lot of us in the people in the court system aren't always able to fix. This one idea that's going to push somebody, thrust somebody into their own personal self-awareness and willingness to take accountability for their behavior. That's an individual journey. And it might take a whole series of incidents or, not great things happening. You lose your kids, you lose your partner, you lose family. You might have isolation, you might have lost employment, job, and work. Still may not get a person to have that self-reflection. But we don't have to collude with it as if we pretend as if things are okay. And I think that's what sometimes families do. They become quiet and they just pretend everything is okay.
So I really love where this conversation is going. And I have to say, I don't know that it was going in the direction that I thought it would, quite honestly, which I love even more. So every time I'm with the two of you and with Stephanie as well, I kind of learn more, a different approach. And I think some folks that might have been tuning into this podcast probably thought they were going to come across with, here's the safety plan, this is what you do, check, 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 check. And I think as both of you had said, it's much more complex than that. And we have to check our own selves. We have to do some of our own internal work. We have to make sure that we're not making movement what is more comfortable for me, but is more what is in the best interest of the family that I'm kind of working with. And that we want to kind of show up in love, both with the offender or the person that might be causing harm and for the person who's experiencing it and possibly the children. But just for folks that are listening in, I think sometimes it's easier just for an example. So 4th of July is coming around the corner, Thanksgiving holidays are coming up. And if you do have that family reunion, that connection, I was at a wedding this past weekend, you're seeing those dynamics kind of play out. And you're seeing that language, you're seeing those signs that somebody has been harmed, and you're seeing that partner, that spouse, whether it's belittling behavior, whether it's statements being made. What are kind of your thoughts at that time? Would you kind of pull different people aside and have conversations with them, or what would be first steps for somebody kind of listening in and tuning into this conversation?
Well, if you put me in a situation like you just did, I probably am going to address the person I know and feel most comfortable with. And if that happens to be the person that's doing the harm or what I perceive as been doing the harm, I would probably pull that person aside because it's not going to do you any good to make a big scene. It's not going to help the other person. But I would definitely pull them aside and say, I'm not okay. I'm never going to be okay with watching you talk to somebody that way. Nobody deserves that. I know I'm not in your family day in and day out. It doesn't matter. That language, that tone is hurtful. It's destructive. And wherever you want to be in your relationship, you're probably not going to get there if this dynamic's going on. So I care about you. You're part of my family, at the same time, I'm not going to condone what I'm watching. And that's not said with hate or horrendous language or calling out or trying to embarrass people or the kind of things. If the other party is who I'm most comfortable with and feel closest to, I'm probably going to spend time loving on them and educating them. It's not okay to be talked to that way. Like, you deserve better, validating what their experience has been, providing a safe space for them to offer more information and what their concerns may be. That's just off the top of my head. I think it's who you're who you're
connection
most
to.
engaged and who you're connected with
Yeah.
kind of situation.
What about you, Latanya?
Yeah, I think that, what we're talking about is creating conditions where someone can say what they need to say, tell their truth. If I can see it, like I don't have to co-sign the ways that you are, spinning your pain on everybody. So I can say that. I can see your pain. It must be painful for you to have to monitor everything she's doing. She's just dancing and having a great time. He's just dancing and having a great time. And I can see that you're not. What is that really about? I've got to approach it from a standpoint that I do care about this family member, but I don't condone the madness. And my hope for you is that you will be open to getting out of it, for yourself. What you're trying to take over there is never going to be the thing that feeds you here. And that's a real conversation I would have. Or a real one, that you're hurting people, right? And I have had these conversations at family functions.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times my family doesn't want me to be there because and here she comes. She's not with that again. But it's creating conditions for even, nieces and nephews or younger people who are watching to see that not everybody is.
It's great modeling, isn't it?
Yeah. Not everybody is bought into this subservience within this family, and that violence is the answer to everything in this family. And so I don't know what that ripple effect looks like in the family, years on down, but I know that I've tried to plant a seed, and I've tried to make it known that a person who has caused harm can come to me, as well as the person that I am assuming is, being targeted. When we set up this victim and perpetrator, a victim always has to have a perpetrator. A perpetrator always has to have a victim. There's no end to that cycle. And if I hold this person accountable in this situation, but they have not come to some sort of understanding, they're just going to do it over here. And so we are living in a society that says this is all okay. And we've all got to be looking at, those are the conditions in which we're operating in. What I don't want to do is cause harm,
Right.
interrupt, and get the person who's being targeted beaten right after. More backlash.
Right.
Because they feel like they've been telling me something that, and so I want to be clear. I've been watching you.
Mm-hmm.
This has nothing to do
With what I've been told.
with what I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm
I've watched
you. I'm seeing the pain you're in, and I can feel it in the energy that you're putting out right now. I want something.
And that
for
kind of
you.
kind of approach, that humanist approach, right? It's a very humanistic approach to an individual, is a great model. And I don't know that we know how that plays out generationally just yet, because we're just learning how to practice this in many ways in our own families and addressing it, because for so long we did not and have not. So this discussion is a perfect time. But I think about the nieces and nephews who are sitting there going, Aunt LaTanya, and so if they ever run into the situation, they're going to know where the safe people are or who's going to be present for them, whatever the situation is. So the trickle effect to other families, giving them the same members, giving them the same courage in a loving way to address that's how you begin to change generational.
And I
violence.
love that that language that you used about creating these conditions, maybe deconstructing some conditions that have been, laid, the foundation that's been laid by our family, and creating new ones. But a lot of that, it sounds like it's done through those conversations. So you have to be willing to say out loud, this is not okay, whether it's to the person doing the harm or the person that's experiencing the harm. Someone needs to hear, this is not okay.
We have to be willing to take some risks. And that's how I know when it's not about me, because I'm not one to do it.
That's a great point.
But
it's not comfortable for anybody.
No, it's not comfortable. But when I'm willing to take a risk in broaching the conversation, I know that that's when I'm doing that for the benefit of our family, and the humanity of our family. And then if I look at the different levels for my community, for my state, for my nation, we've got to be willing to risk something so that we can come up out of this terrible, terrible dreamland.
Right.
Terrible carnival that we're all like attending. Like we bought some tickets to some madness.
And I think that's, oh, go ahead.
I would just say, I would really tell family members too, you need to educate yourself. You need your own knowledge about what this looks like, what the impact is, how it can play out, so that when you do use your courage and that strength, because you want to have accountability, that comes with knowledge. And you can do that by being able to inform people, be able to guide them, give them choices, options, thoughts with an open heart and open mind, without necessarily feeling that you somehow have to be a part of the total solution. It is not your solution. It is their solution, without you taking control away from those very individuals who've already had control taken away. So the more you know as a family member, as a friend, a colleague, about this issue and the dynamics, and their powerful dynamics, and have lots of layers to them, the better we will be in our approach of accountability through education and resources.
You know where you can learn more about this dynamic? Where? Is at itsTimeLexington.org, where we do have information about what those dynamics look like.
I think so too. And I think, I thank you both for being on here. And I think that is what we're hoping It's Time will do, is getting people to be a little bit prepared, to begin thinking a little bit what their sphere of influence, what their access is, whether, again, that's with their family, which is this first podcast conversation, their friends and family, and then opening it up to larger community, because that is often who is seeing this play out. And I think we all have ability to kind of show forth that we want a caring community. And I love that we spend so much time talking about how we approach, the person that may be causing harm, because they need love too. But there's a difference between excusing behavior and lovingly intervening, or having some accountability and having some really honest conversations about it. So, I hope, folks are listening in, begin to practice this and begin to kind of open up their eyes when it's not domestic violence, it's just happening over there, right? It's something that we're seeing in our own personal worlds. So, yeah.
No, I just want to add this, that just because this is the way that it has been, or you've been told that it's always been like this, does not mean that is true. You can feel inside of you what is true, and to trust that, because this does take some courage. Sometimes we believe that it's easier to be in our families if we ignore, right? And if we just continue to do what we've always done. But if you ask yourself, is that true? You'll find that pain is greater to keep carrying this out. This takes some courage, some willingness to evolve, and that's possible for all of us.
Yeah. Thank you.
And when the worst happens, that's the hardest calls I receive in this work, is when the worst has happened and families members look at me and say, I didn't want to know. I didn't ever challenge. I didn't offer. I didn't intervene. And then the sense of regret and pain that comes with it. Of course, it's not their fault, and our job is to help alleviate and make some sense out of situations that are senseless in many ways. This is a time. It's time.
Oh yeah.
It's time, Lexington, to have these conversations, to not have to make those phone calls when the worst happens, because there's so much that can be done before that ever gets to that level, if we can walk in our truth and help other people walk in theirs.
I don't know that there's anything else left. Well, there's so much more left to be said, but it was beautiful saying that, and that pain can be real. And I just so appreciate both of you for coming on. I know Stephanie and I were really looking forward to this conversation. So thank you for our first It's Time podcast.
Thank you. It's always an honor to say with you amazing ladies.
Thank you so much for tuning in to It's Time to Talk. Please take what you've heard here today and find a way to incorporate it into your own life.
This podcast is funded by Mayor Gorton's It's Time campaign. If you'd like more information on how you can be a part of ending domestic violence in Lexington, visit itstimelexington.org.